Getting proof. No. Now we go. Start streaming. Okay, right. Hopefully this is working now. This is about the third time I've tried starting a live stream. Unfortunately, when you do these unplanned, it doesn't always work quite as well as you'd hope. You kind of have to schedule these events, and then I'm never quite sure if it's working. Right, let me have a look. According to this, right, we've got some people on the top chat. No, I've got something working. Right, if you can hear me, send me a tweet just saying, yes, you can hear me. I'm really not sure whether this is working right now. The technology doesn't always give you immediate feedback because of the delay. I'm not always sure if this is working straight away. So I'm just going to look at my Twitter. If you can hear me, can you just send me a message saying, yes, we can hear you, we can see you, we're ready to go for part 2 of the live stream. I know there's about a 15 to 20 second delay, so I'm just going to wait for those messages to come in, hopefully. Here we go. Got a new notification. Hopefully that's someone saying yes. Oh no, that was someone saying, what time do you hope to begin part 2? It has started already, but hopefully it is working now. So I'm just going to wait a second or two to see if this is working. According to the live chat, everything is... Yes, people can hear me. Yes, good. Right, let's go. I'm going to get started anyway. I'm just basically going to go for this second live stream. Just going to remind you of a few points. So obviously, welcome. This is mainly focusing on the Catholic Christianity paper, mainly looking at AQA, but also used for Educast and EdXL. If you've got any questions, send them to me on Mr. McMillan Revise. Play nice in the live chat. I have some spies who are looking at what's going on in the live chat. I have to say it completely the mind boggles the sort of stuff you guys want to say to each other in this kind of situation. I think I'm basically going to just ignore that completely, and you guys can get on with whatever you want. I am going to be following the notifications on Twitter, so that's what I'm going to be looking at. 4 questions, and I'm just going to try and answer as many as I can in the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so. So hopefully we will get through quite a bit. So let's get started. There were quite a few questions that came in during the break, so I'm going to start with some of those, and then we'll see how far we can get. Right, let's go to... Lauren, Jessica, hi. Please can you go over traditional and spontaneous prayer and views on the Trinity? Let's start with the traditional and spontaneous prayer. Let me just clear a new slide so I can actually write some stuff down, remind ourselves what we've actually said. So, spontaneous versus traditional prayer. This is quite a nice topic. I can imagine if this was a 12-mark question, it'd be a nice easy one because it's been set up already in what you've learned as a debate. So spontaneous prayer is basically prayer that you make up on the spot, sometimes called extemporaneous prayer. You probably don't need to remember that. So spontaneous prayer tends to be better in the situations where you want to pray from the heart, you want to pray for something specifically for your own needs. It has the advantage of being very personal. It probably feels more sincere, can help the person feel very close to God because it feels like they're in a very personal relationship with Him. Traditional prayers are those prayers that have already been written down before by someone else. Obviously, there's some very famous examples like the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be. These prayers tend to be better in situations where a person might not know exactly how they feel or what they want to say. The added benefit of a traditional prayer is that it can be said by a group of people together. So when you, perhaps if you're in a faith school and you say prayer at the end of an assembly, you have that sense of unity that just listening to a prayer someone makes up doesn't quite have. So that's basically the two kind of points. Like I said, I could easily imagine an evaluation question saying, spontaneous prayer is better than traditional prayer or vice versa, agree or disagree. So a nice topic there because it's already set up as an evaluation. So let's have a look what other questions are coming in on the Twitter. So let's go to the next one that I can find. There's actually lots of retweets and likes and various personal things. We've done the traditional spontaneous prayer. So this is from Blessing. Could you go over the sacramental nature of reality and grace? Let's start with grace. So grace is God's love for people, for all human beings, And Catholic Christians particularly believe that God's grace can be experienced through ordinary things, and that's what we call the sacramental nature of reality. So in the Catholic Church there are 7 sacraments. They all use ordinary things. By that I mean things like water in baptism, things like bread and wine in Holy Communion, things like oil in confirmation. These are ordinary things, yet the Church believes that they become extraordinary, and that God actually gives his grace to people through those things. So Catholics will say when a person is baptized, it's not just a symbolic washing with water, but it is in fact giving them grace. They are actually encountering God in a very real way, and that grace is sanctifying them, making them holy. The same in Holy Communion. It's not just bread and wine. In fact, it becomes much more than bread and wine for those who believe through transubstantiation. It becomes for us the body and blood of Christ. So again, Catholics would say it is not purely a symbolic gesture, but it is in fact a way in which we actually encounter Christ. We receive God's grace. That is what we mean by the sacramental nature of reality, that God allows things to help him send his grace to us through those things. Now, grace itself is described as God's undeserved love for human beings. A nice way I've heard it put is grace is the fact that there's nothing you can do that can make God love you any more or any less. It's a completely unconditional love, and when Christians accept that, respond to it, then they experience God's love in their life. Okay, let's go to some more topics. Like I said, I'm going to go over these quite quickly because I want to get through as many questions as possible. Right. Some of these are trying to cover 2 big topics, so please summarise the church and the kingdom of God. That's a whole unit. I can't really summarise that just in that time. So, can you talk about the importance of sacraments? Well, that's Tanya. I sort of just did that, so it is about that sacramental nature for Catholics. They honestly do believe that God gives them grace through those sacraments. They are not just symbolic gestures. You're not just going through the motions, but in fact, God is meeting you in those encounters, in those sacraments. That is the idea that God, since God has entered into creation in the person of Jesus, that means ordinary physical things can have incredible significance and importance. Okay, Holly O'Shea asks, please could you go over the pontifical and conciliar nature of the church? Okay, I realised I said I was going to write this stuff down and I haven't. So conciliar basically comes from the word council. I sort of dealt with this in the first video. It is the idea that basically the church has decided, certainly the Catholic Church has been structured in such a way that when it wants to discuss an issue, or when it faces a new challenge, perhaps a new type of teaching, like Arianism in the 4th century, that it gets everyone, or rather all the leaders of the church, together in a council, discusses the issues, and then basically kind of makes a recommendation that says this is what we propose to be the official teaching of the church. So we're responding to this issue and this is the way forward. Now that needs to be seen in conjunction with the fact that the church is pontifical, which means led by a single person who is the Pope. He sometimes is called the pontiff. So to be pontifical basically means there's one person at the top who kind of stands over and above and kind of is the final go-to person. Many organisations in a sense are pontifical. Any organisation that has one person at the top rather than a group of people sharing responsibility is pontifical. Now, you put conciliar and pontifical together because it kind of sounds like there could be a contradiction, because conciliar sounds like it's lots of people working together and pontifical sounds like you're saying one person in charge. Well, they do kind of work together. The council, which is the Pope and the bishops working together, discussing an issue, acting as the magisterium, make kind of almost a recommendation, and then there's the Pope who kind of signs it off, as it were. If the council make a recommendation and the Pope says, nope, I don't agree, don't think that's the right way forward, then it doesn't become official church teaching. It's only if the Pope says, yep, that's the way forward, that it kind of gets accepted and becomes part of the apostolic tradition, part of the church's teaching. Okay, so that's pontifical and conciliar. Right, question here from Bo. Can you tell me the significance of the Trinity in the Nicene Creed? That's a really good question. The Trinity is in the Nicene Creed, although it doesn't use the word Trinity. We know that was a later kind of invention to describe what they were explaining. But if you read the Trinity, it has kind of the 3 parts of the Trinity. So it talks about, I believe in God the Father. It then talks about believing in God or Jesus, his only Son. And then it talks about God the Holy Spirit. So there are three distinct parts that mention each of the three persons. A couple of elements that are added. The Nicene Creed is based heavily on an earlier version called the Apostles' Creed. But if you're someone who goes to church regularly, you'll know that the Nicene Creed is much longer, much more detailed, and they added quite a few things in that to clarify what was considered official church teaching. And the most obvious examples of that is the specific the specific descriptions of who Jesus is, because you may remember that in the 4th century there was a priest called Arius, who started preaching that Jesus was not equal to God. He said there was a time when Jesus was not. In other words, God came first, according to Arius, and then Jesus was kind of created by God second. And that was contrary to what the church had taught. The church was very clear. Jesus and God are equal. They are both part of the Trinity. And so in the Nicene Creed, they had to clarify this and say, we reject the idea that Jesus is somehow lesser than God. And so they added a couple of phrases that really make this clear. And one of them was, they said Jesus is consubstantial, just checking the spelling, with the Father. Now, consubstantial, it's a word they pretty much had to kind of almost make up specifically to describe what was going on in the Trinity. And they said Jesus is consubstantial, made of the same substance as the Father. In other words, they are equal. They added a couple of other phrases about Jesus to make this point really, really clear. They said God from God, God from God, light from light, and as if to really make the point, as if anyone could have any doubt, they then added true God from true God. In other words, they were saying it is absolutely clear as far as we are concerned that Jesus is God. He is equal to God the Father. They are equal. And so Arius, or the Arians, the people who followed him, had to basically say, okay, fine, we disagree, and therefore we can't agree with you. Okay, let's carry on. Let's go closer to the top. So let's get some of these new notifications and just see what sort of things people are asking for. Okay, we have Kim, pilgrimage and the Stations of the Cross. Okay, good topic. So we have pilgrimage, put very simply, a journey to a place of religious significance. That's the kind of most obvious use of the term. And within the topics we've studied, most of those would refer to either pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to Rome, to Lourdes, or to Walsingham. Those are the four that are kind of listed in the AQA exam board, and you need to know a little bit about each of those. So Jerusalem, the place where Jesus lived, and not lived, he kind of was born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth, but then travelled to Jerusalem, and ultimately the place where he died, and then rose again. We then have Rome, which is the home of the Catholic Church, the place where Peter is buried. You have Lourdes, which is significant for Catholics because that's where Mary appeared to St. Bernadette. And then you have Walsingham, a place in Norfolk where Mary appeared to a wealthy widow, and there was a kind of a shrine set up and a place of pilgrimage that people went to. Stations of the Cross really are a kind of mini pilgrimage, is probably the best way to describe it. So every time a Catholic walks into a church, they can go on their own mini pilgrimage where they follow the Stations of the Cross around the church. So these images or carvings, or even some cases statues that depict Jesus' final journey. And that is the same journey that Christians who go to Jerusalem go on, called the Via Dolorosa, which is the route, traditional route through Jerusalem that people believe it's possible Jesus went on from the place where he was sentenced to death to the place where he was executed. And that's still a route people take today, every day within Jerusalem. So the Stations of the Cross kind of mimic that and allow Christians to do that journey themselves whenever they want to. Okay, Ivy, what do the Beatitudes teach? Okay, I'm going to use a really kind of what's the word I'm looking for? An easy kind of way to remember. It's almost a bit kind of cheesy, but the Beatitudes can be remembered as the Beatitudes. 2 words, okay? They're basically a kind of almost like a new version of the commandments, or an alternative to the Ten Commandments. Because the Ten Commandments, which are the basis of Jewish faith and practice and are still considered important for Christians, are a set of commandments. They're a set of rules. And rules sometimes can be very good, but they can also be quite limiting. And sometimes people get caught up on, well, as long as I just stick to the rules, I'll be fine. And people can sometimes... what they talk about is following the letter of the law, but maybe not the spirit of the law. And that's something that Jesus was concerned about. There were certain Jews at the time who technically kept to the commandments, but their hearts, their attitudes were very far from God. And so he proposes these Beatitudes, these blessing statements, as a kind of alternative to say, look, actually, rules are only good insofar as they make your attitude good. And he says if that's not the case, then you need to kind of think again. And the Beatitudes are a list of kind of 8 attitudes, kind of states of being that Jesus wants his followers to have. He says, you want to be, blessed are the merciful. He wants his followers to be merciful. Okay, that is a kind of attitude that can then be applied in different situations. That's why it's kind of perhaps better than a set of rules, is a set of values or attitudes. Say, be like this, and you can interpret that and put it into any situation. So that's where really the Beatitudes come from. So it's about, they are a set of expectations or values that Jesus wants his followers to follow. It gives them more leeway, more usefulness than just a simple set of rules that say do this, don't do that. So they're often seen in comparison with the Ten Commandments. Okay, let's go on to some more notifications. Just taking a sip of my iron brew. Talia, can you go over Catholic social teaching, CAFOD and SVP? Okay, I'm going to have to be careful here not to go into, sounds weird, but to not go into too much detail. I mean, Catholic social teaching, or CST for short, is something that has a lot of depth to it. There are lots of different, there's a whole set of principles of Catholic social teaching, which, at my school we study that in sixth form, and we go into a lot of detail. The basic idea of Catholic social teaching is it's kind of Christian teaching in action, but particularly for society as a whole. Okay, Christians can sometimes be very much focused on how they act as individuals and how we treat one another. I can try and be a good Christian and treat my fellow person with dignity and compassion and respect, and that's very good, and hopefully do that. But how do I act as a Christian within society as a whole? What kind of society do I want to be a part of? And Catholic social teaching is a set of principles. I'm going to write this down. Set of principles that aim to kind of create, I guess it's kingdom values, really, create kingdom values in society. So Catholic social teaching is trying to create a world of peace, justice and reconciliation. Every time a government or a society or a charity or a pressure group try and create peace, justice or reconciliation, they are promoting Catholic social teaching. Now, you've asked specifically about CAFOD and SVP. Obviously, people can do that on one level. So Pope Francis, when he speaks out against injustice and works for reconciliation by inviting members of different religions to the Vatican and meeting with them and praying them, he sets a great example. But I can only look at that and go, well, that's great, but I can't do that. I've got my own work to do, my own job to do, and all those things. But what I can do, and what many Catholics do, is to support, and this could be financially or practically. Gosh, my typing is going very poor as we get later during the evening. Practically, charities like CAFOD and SVP. So, in a sense, I can give money or I could give time and actually volunteer at a charity that puts these principles, these kingdom values into action. So CAFOD, the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, works overseas, particularly to fight injustice. There are places in the world where people don't have access to their basic human rights, and CAFOD very much works on promoting sustainable development that helps those people in those situations to have to be treated fairly, to have equal access to, the world's wealth and the world's what's the word I'm looking for? Resources. So very much talking about fair trade and trying to, help support those in less economically developed countries. SVP is much more locally focused, so many churches, parishes have their own SVP group where people identify local needs and they work to meet those needs. Again, often focused on injustice and promoting fairness and equality and dignity and all those positive things that Christians are meant to support. Okay, let's go on to some more. Just looking at the latest notifications. Let's see what comes through. Can you talk about euthanasia and abortion? That's someone called Mr. Gold or Bo Cook 28, whichever you prefer. So euthanasia and abortion. Part of me is disappointed that these topics don't get a bigger billing in the new GCSEs, but they are still in there, so I'm glad that they're in there at all. From a Christian perspective, specifically a Catholic Christian perspective, so both of these really come back to two ideas which are kind of connected, and that is the sanctity of life and the image of God. So Christians believe in the sanctity of life. They believe that all human life is sacred. That means no matter what, it deserves to be protected and respected and preserved. And that belief is based on the idea that all humans are made in the image of God. You know, there are lots of verses in the Bible that talk about the dignity and importance and value of humans, but really the idea that we are made in the image of God, which goes right back to Genesis 1, is the most fundamental. It's the best one to use. It says, if we are made in God's image, then we are special in his creation. We all have an equality, a dignity, a value that can't be taken away, regardless of whether we are old or young, ill or healthy, able-bodied or disabled. All of these things don't take away from our unique inherent value as human beings made in the image of God. Now, in the context of abortion and euthanasia, which are both issues to do with life and the value of life, this question about the sanctity of life becomes central. Now, abortion, for the purpose of definition, is the deliberate termination of a fetus, so of a pregnancy that has started. So it's the deliberately terminating, ending that pregnancy. Catholics are pro-life. Okay, so Catholics are pro-life. That basically means they believe that from the moment of conception, the fetus or the embryo is a human being who deserves the same protection and support as any born human being. Okay, Catholics will often refer to the fetus or the embryo as an unborn child in a way to strengthen that connection. This is a human being, this is a child, this is someone who deserves our protection. We wouldn't let someone go around deliberately terminating babies. Therefore, if we treat the embryo, the fetus, as a human, as a baby, then we should do the same, offer it the same protection. Obviously, there are many other people who disagree with that view, who would call themselves pro-choice. They would say, actually, there is a limit to the value of that embryo because it is dependent on the mother's body. Then to an extent we have to allow that woman, that mother, to have choice over what happens to her body. To an extent, obviously lots of people draw that line, maybe sometime in the middle of the pregnancy at the point of viability or something else, but ultimately say actually it should be the woman's choice. So that's where the pro-choice argument comes from. Some Christians agree with that, but generally Catholics, or certainly officially Catholics, are pro-life. Now, euthanasia, again, Catholics are pro-life in this situation. They would say, if in doubt, we should err on the side of life. They would say that God created every human being and God alone has the right to choose when a person dies. That's not a right that he passes on to human beings. Although we have free will and we have the ability to make certain decisions, it doesn't mean we have the right to decide when someone's life ends. Some Christians would disagree. Again, some Christians would say, well, actually, we're taught to love our neighbour. Sometimes it may be the most loving thing to do to allow someone to have their life shortened of their own choosing, whether that be by euthanasia or assisted suicide. There are others who would go even further to the other end, who would say, actually, we must do everything we possibly can to keep people alive, even when it appears that there is no hope of recovery. If someone is in a coma where there is no brain activity, some particularly evangelical Protestants say, actually, we can't even decide to switch off a life support machine because that, in a sense, we know it's going to end that person's life. So it's just as bad as deliberately ending someone's life. So there's a range of views on euthanasia. You've got the evangelicals who say we've got to defend life at absolutely every cost, no matter what, even if it looks hopeless. We've got the kind of liberal branch of the Protestant church that says, look, it's up to the person involved. If we think that this is the most loving thing to do, then it could be considered a compassionate, kind thing to help this person end their life. And then you've got the Catholic view in the middle, which basically says only God can decide. We must do everything reasonably to keep a person alive. We certainly shouldn't, help someone end their life deliberately. That would be going against the sanctity of life. Okay, let's go over the next few questions. A few more notifications coming in. How are we doing for time? I'm going to probably do another 10 minutes or so. I can see that the number of notifications is slowing down a bit, which is good. That means some of you are going off to bed, getting some revision. Let's see. I've got a couple of questions from people who've already asked some, so I'm going to try and give some other people a chance. Let's go with... I don't know how to pronounce this. It's spelled it's DK. I don't know if that's meant to be what that's meant to be. But anyway, you've asked, can you talk about Jesus, the Word of God? I did a little bit of this back in the first live stream earlier this evening. I'll just do a bit again. It comes from John 1, or John's prologue. Okay, the first chapter of John's Gospel, where he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he's deliberately reminding us of the beginning of Genesis, where it says in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. And what John is trying to say is the birth of Jesus, which he's about to go on and describe, is not just the birth of a random person in the middle of, first century Israel or Palestine. This is a cosmic event. This is the God the God who created the universe coming down to earth. And so he uses this Greek word logos, which translates roughly as a word. Okay. And this is an interesting take on the Trinity, particularly for John, who's writing very early on before the word Trinity was even developed. And he's saying basically Jesus is God's word. He is the thing through which God creates. And this creates an interesting link, because when you go back and look at Genesis 1, you might at first assume that in Genesis, which is a Jewish piece of writing originally, that there's no concept of Trinity. That's something Christians came up with later. But actually, Christians now look at it and say, well, if you think about it, you've got God, who it says created, and it says God speaks, and through the power of his word, he creates. And it talks about also God's Spirit hovering over the waters. So what's really significant about calling Jesus God's word is it allows you to see the Trinity in Genesis, which is quite remarkable if you're a Christian, saying even before Christianity existed, the Trinity, which is the specifically Christian idea of God, was already there in Genesis. And so when John says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, he's saying that Jesus, this God the Son, who we are able to see as Jesus of Nazareth, was there from the beginning, was with God, was part of the creation of the universe. Okay, let's move on. Let's have a look at some more questions. Again, I can just see the number starting to slow down a bit, so that's a good sign. We're probably coming into a landing soon. We'll come to an end. Let's have a look. Elizabeth Simpson asks, can you talk about Michelangelo's The Last Judgement and what it symbolises? Really good question. This is something I've only recently taught to my group, so it's fresh in my memory. It was one of the last topics we did. So just as with the creation of Adam, The Last Judgement is another painting that you'll find in the Sistine Chapel. Okay, well worth a visit if you ever go to Rome, although do be prepared to queue. It takes a long time to get through that. I'm talking a few hours. So we have this painting at the back of the Sistine Chapel. So on the back wall, there is this entire wall which is painted full of human-like figures, almost life-size actually. If you go up and look at this, almost like they've been painted life-size. So it is a really large, impressive painting, and it portrays the Last Judgment. This is Michelangelo's kind of interpretation, his view of what the Last Judgment might be like. This event at the end of time when the living and the dead are stood before Jesus and they're judged and they're sent off to their eternal destinations. And how do we know it's the Last Judgment? Well, the first clue is the angels with trumpets. So towards the middle, at the bottom, there's a group of angels and they've got these long trumpets. Doesn't look like the kind of trumpet you might find today. It's more of a long, basically a single horn, and they're blowing these trumpets. And that's a biblical image that is representing the end of the world. So in the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible, it talks about these angels blowing trumpets heralding the end of the world. So that's the clue. That's for those who are watching. That's Michelangelo saying, look, this is the end of the world. All right, so pay attention. Then, above the angels, you have Jesus, okay? Jesus is stood there in a position of power. He's got his right arm raised. And how do we know it's Jesus? Well, he's got scars in his hands and in his feet and even in his side. So this is clearly Michelangelo saying, that's Jesus. We all know how he died, and you can see the wounds right there. So Jesus is stood there. He's very much alive. He's very much in a position of power and strength, okay? He's not someone who's weak and just being crucified. He is strong and powerful. And just to his side, okay, is his mother Mary, okay? She's clearly at his right-hand side. Now, right-hand side is important in imagery of this sort. Right-hand side is good and left-hand side is bad, okay? And that comes from the simple fact that the majority of people are right-handed, so that's seen as good, okay? Sorry for any of you lefties out there, but that's just the way society has traditionally pictured it. So on his right hand side is Mary, okay, and along with Mary on the original painting, okay, those are the only two people who were not naked, okay. Everyone else was naked. Now since then some of them have had their personal bits covered up by later artists for whatever reason, but originally everyone else is naked, and that's a sign by Michelangelo that in judgment all are equal, okay. It would have been so clear at the time of Michelangelo when you walked through Rome who the wealthy were and who the poor were. Your clothes very much would have defined your status, but in judgment everyone's equal. There's no status there. Everyone's equal. And so what this is saying is that when people are judged, what Michelangelo is trying to portray is everyone stands before God with only themselves to kind of defend themselves, as it were. Now, if you look at the painting on our left, but Jesus is right, the people are coming up from the ground and they are rising up, okay? So the right hand are rising up, and actually at the bottom you can see almost like skeletal figures rising up from the ground, so the dead being raised. So those who've been dead in the grave are rising up. And interestingly, the people on the right are helping each other, okay? If you look, they're supporting, they're pulling each other up. This idea that the righteous are those who help one another. A bit like in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. The rich man doesn't help, doesn't see the needs of others. He's very much on his own. But the righteous in this painting are helping each other up, rising upwards towards heaven. Okay? By contrast, those people on the left-hand side, okay, the bad side, are going downwards, okay? Not all of them. There's a few people close to Jesus who are actually some of the saints, but certainly down towards the bottom you've got these people and they're pushing, okay? They are fighting. They are clearly in it for themselves, and perhaps that's the reason why they're headed towards hell, because they are selfish and they've not seen the needs of other people and they've not seen their need of God. And so they're pushing down towards hell. And if you look right down in the bottom right hand corner, again Jesus' left, you've got this figure actually from Greek mythology called Chiron, who is sending people down the river towards Hades, towards hell. Okay, and then the final kind of element that's worth mentioning is, I just mentioned them a second ago, on Jesus' immediate left, okay, which I'm not sure why they're not on the right, but perhaps there was just a case of some other space issue, and they are the saints. There's some people there who are recognizable as identifiable people, and probably the best one to remember, because it's the most gruesome image, is Saint Bartholomew, who is standing there and he's holding his skin. He's got an empty set of human skin and he's holding a knife because he was flayed. He was put to death by having his skin cut off. Okay, pretty gruesome way to go. But what this shows is that in the afterlife, in judgment, he is no longer carrying those scars. Okay, so there is a sense in which when we are resurrected, when we die and enjoy eternal life, we do not. It is not a physical resurrection, or at least if it is, it's not our physical bodies that are resurrected from the ground. The body that we have that's buried or cremated is not the one that's reborn. We're somehow given some kind of new spiritual body. Okay, so that is the Last Judgment. I've spent quite a bit of time on that, but there's a lot to it. Right, let's see what other questions we've got coming through. Just waiting for it to catch up. Here we go. See if I can find another good question. Someone who has not yet asked one or not had one answered. Let's see. Some of these I've already covered, so I'm kind of trying to avoid going over the same ones again and again. Right. Someone has asked, can you talk about the sheep and the goats parable, please? That's someone called from Bakary. I'm not going to say your surname because, yes, while I appreciate the pun, not ready for now. So, Bakary, can you talk about sheep and goats parable? This parable, I think actually is a bit not the best name for a parable because the mention of sheep and goats is so particularly short. Really, it's a description. I want to do this in the lower text box. It's a description of the final judgment. So what I was just describing in Michelangelo's painting is very much based on this parable of the sheep and goats. And basically what Jesus says is at the end of time, all of the nations, all of the people will stand before God. They will stand before, all people will stand before Jesus, who will judge them, and he will separate them on the left and right. And on the right hand side are the sheep. Okay, and the sheep represent the righteous. These are the people who, according to Jesus, helped their neighbor when they were in need. They fed the hungry, they clothed the naked, they visited those in prison, they welcomed the lonely. While on the left hand side are the goats. Okay, not sure why goats get such a bad deal in this parable. Not sure what's wrong with a goat, why they're any better or worse than a sheep, but there you go. That was obviously the imagery that Jesus chose, and they are referred to as the unrighteous. Okay, and basically their destination, whereas the righteous get to enjoy the kingdom of heaven, the unrighteous go to eternal damnation, to hell, and they are separated from God. And again, they're separated on the fact that they did not do those things. They did not feed the hungry and clothe the naked. And they say, you know, in the original part, Jesus says, oh, you didn't feed me, you didn't visit me, you didn't help me. And they say, well, when did we see you in need, Lord? When, if we'd seen you, if I'd seen Jesus walking down the street hungry, I would of course fed him because he's Jesus. And Jesus says, but every time you didn't do these for the least of these brothers of mine, you didn't do it for me. And so in a sense, Jesus says how we treat the less fortunate is a reflection of how we treat God. Okay, so that's really the point that he's making there, that our treatment of those in need is a reflection of how we treat God. Okay, so that is the parable of the sheep and the goats. Right, let's have a look, see if we can find some more questions. Still a few coming in. I think I'm going to give this another 5 minutes. I know that means some of you won't get your questions answered. I do apologise, but that's just the way it is. I've got to go to bed at some point, and so do you guys. Right, I am going to have to respond to this particular tweet. Joshua, you may have known that I am a fan of cats. I have a cat. He's not around at the moment. He's not made an appearance this evening, but never mind. And you've chosen to use a GIF of Puss in Boots from Shrek to get my attention. Very well played. I salute you, Joshua. And so you've asked me to talk about funerals. Okay, I did do a little bit of this earlier in the first live stream. Perhaps you missed it, but I'll just give you a very quick summary of the basics. Let's go over 3 parts of a funeral, or certainly a Catholic funeral. We have the reception of the body. So the body arrives at the church, it's carried in, the priest blesses it with holy water, because every time this person entered the church when they were alive, they blessed themselves with holy water. So on this occasion, the priest does it for them. We then have the funeral itself, which is actually part of what we call a requiem mass. Okay, requiem being a Latin word, basically meaning kind of rest. And basically that is, in some sense, a normal mass. It has all the same parts, the liturgy of the word, liturgy of the Eucharist, but obviously the focus is on resurrection. It is a kind of meant to be a celebration rather than agreement, saying we believe this person whose body lies in front of us now, that their soul is now with God in heaven. That is our belief, or that is our hope, and therefore we are going to basically celebrate that through the readings and through joining in communion with God. And then the final part is the committal. Okay, and again, there's a blessing of the body with holy water, and this is basically a final offering of the person to God. And this might take place at the graveyard if the person is being buried, or it could take place at a crematorium if the person is being cremated. So you've got those 3 main parts of a funeral. So reception of the body, requiem mass, and the committal. Right, let's go back to the last couple of questions. I'm going to cut the time off at 5 to 10, so that gives us 6 minutes. So I'm just going to get the last few notifications. Right. Kim, can you go over the mission and the evangelism in drama and how this is a link to the church and the kingdom of God? Okay, this is not one of my favourite topics. I think this is an example of the example trying to place two things together that don't really go, but there you go. So they talk about drama. I'm going to talk to you about Les Miserables. Not my favourite film ever, but it's worth knowing about in this particular context. So it is really a story of redemption. Okay, we have Jean Valjean, this convict who's living at a time where ex-convicts don't really get treated well. He goes to a monastery or a church, can't remember exactly what, near the start of the story, and he steals. He takes away all the kind of precious metal, the chalices and all the things that the monastery has. And on his way out, he's caught by the local kind of police effectively, and they say, well, why have you got all this stuff? You've stolen it. And he says, oh no, he thinks on his feet, says, I haven't stolen it. They gave it to me. Let's go back and you ask them and they'll tell you. And so the police take him back, and the priest, the monk, whoever it is, I can't quite remember the specific details, basically sees what has happened and decides to kind of lie on behalf of Jean Valjean. He says to the police, yes, we did give them this person has not stolen, let him be on his way. And kind of Jean Valjean's like, oh my gosh, what's on earth has happened? This priest has just lied on my behalf. He's given me a second chance. And then basically the priest says to Jean Valjean, right, go and make a difference. Don't forget the kind of mercy that you were shown, because he's shown him mercy. He could have said, nope, he stole it, throw the book at him, throw him in prison, throw away the key. But he doesn't. He shows him mercy. And so the idea is that basically the rest of the story really is Jean Valjean trying his best to share that mercy onwards with other people. He's trying to show love to others. And mission and evangelism, how does that kind of fit in? Well, mission and evangelism are both about showing or sharing God's love. So in a sense, what Jean Valjean is doing, and like I said, I'm not sure this is the best example the exam board have tried to create, but I can sort of see where they're going with it. They're saying Jean Valjean is trying to show love, the love of God to others. And there's a line towards the end of the story where it says, to love another person is to see the face of God. And that comes from this idea that, Christians believe that God is love. And if you were with me in the first part of the live stream, you'll remember we looked at the Trinity and the idea that the very nature of God as Trinity is that God is love. Augustine it was, and we're going to get quite high level theology here. Augustine talked about the idea that for true love you need a lover, you need the beloved, and you need the love itself. You need someone to love, someone to receive the love, and the love that goes between the two people. And Augustine said that's like the Father is the lover, the Son is the beloved, the one receiving the love, and the Holy Spirit is the love that joins them together. And Christians believe that any time they show love and they experience love, they are kind of in a sense experiencing God. They're seeing what God is really like. And so that's kind of where Jean Valjean, he's trying to share this mercy that he experienced, this grace that was given to him that allowed him to have a second chance, and he shares it through the rest of the film. So he looks out for those who are vulnerable. He takes in the daughter of one of his ex-workers who's died, and he just shows this attitude of love. Okay, let's try and do one more question. We've got 2 minutes. Okay, just the last few tweets coming in. Okay, right, now people are just taking advantage, Camille, just posting pictures of cats hoping that I will take notice. So that's a nice try. It only worked the first time. I'm not going to fall for it again. Okay, let's have a look if I can find one more decent topic. Let's see. Excuse me. So Finley has said he paid money on YouTube Super Chat to be noticed but didn't actually ask a question. So I'm not sure if that's just meant to be a joke or not. I'm sure he, Finley, if he's out there, understands the humour there. So last question. Someone has asked about the 4-mark questions. So Lewis Chamberlain says, what about the 4-mark questions? So really more about a structure. 4-mark questions, basically you are asked to give 2 reasons or explain 2 reasons. 2 marks available for each, so 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay, basic maths, I know that much. If you just give a simple reason, that gets you 1 mark. If you develop the reason, that gets you the 2nd mark. If you do that 2 times, then obviously you get your 4 marks. Simplest way to develop a reason is to write a second sentence. So you give your first point, you say, whatever it is, this is my first reason, and make sure you number it. Say, this is my first reason, this is my second reason. It makes it really easy for the examiner to give you the credit. So this is my first reason, and it is da 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 da. Full stop, and then say, for example, or this means, or something that shows you are developing that reason. You do that twice, that's your 4 marks. There you go. Boom. Job done. Right, it is 5 to 10. It is time to go and get some beauty sleep. As you can see, my hair is looking pretty dreadful by the end of this. This shows that I've been working too hard. You guys need to go get some sleep. I need to get some beauty sleep. I need to be ready to see my Year 11s tomorrow and give them the best of luck towards their exam. I hope you guys have found this helpful. Obviously, if you're still watching, that probably means you have. If you weren't finding it helpful, you probably signed out a long time ago. So, yeah, all I can say is really best of luck towards your exam tomorrow. Sorry if I didn't get around to answering your question. Obviously, you have still got access to all my videos. Hopefully, the right topics are in there somewhere for you. Just a reminder, I will be back on Tuesday evening at the same time doing something very, very similar. The focus on Tuesday will be the Judaism paper and a couple of the themes that we'll be working on. So really, there's nothing else to say except good night. Get a good night's rest. Good luck. Tomorrow, the first day of your GCSE exams for all of you. I know it's going to be nervous, but just relax. You can only do your best. Hopefully, you've put in a lot of hard work already, and now it's just a case of going out there and smashing it and just doing the very best you can. So thank you very much. Have a great night. Good luck in your exam tomorrow. Feel free to tweet me afterwards. Say how you thought it went. Tell me what the questions were. Be really interested to hear what you've got to say. So good luck. Take it easy.